This movie kicks off with this guy named Frank Vega. Frank's been through some tough stuff in his life, especially because he's a Vietnam War vet. One day, he's just riding the bus, minding his own business, when he spots two troublemaker kids causing a ruckus on the bus. It kinda takes him back to when he was a kid, living a simple life with his folks. As he grew up, he had a sweetheart, and they promised to get hitched once he came back from the war. But here's the kicker. Frank had to spend a whole 10 years in the Vietnam War. When he finally got back home, he found out that his girl had gone and married another guy and had 2 kids. Man, that must have hurt. So, the heartbroken Frank decides to give the police academy a shot, thinking his military background would help him out. But they turn him down, which is a real bummer. He couldn't find a job anywhere, so he ends up selling hot dogs for most of his life. That's how he made a living, just slinging those dogs. But then things take a turn for the worse. A fancy new hot dog truck rolls into town and steals almost all of Frank's customers. So he's left with no choice but to become a drifter, wandering around with no real home or job. Tough breaks for Frank Vega, that's for sure. Now let's fast forward to the present day. There are these 2 troublemaker kids on the bus, causing a big scene and even trying to harm an old guy. But Frank steps in and saves the old man, giving those troublemakers a good beating. Some folks on the bus recorded the whole thing and shared it on social media. All of a sudden, Frank becomes a big deal after his heroic act goes viral online. They start calling him badass, and everybody thinks he's awesome. People even start making t-shirts and graffiti with his face on them. The police even give him a ride around town. But that's not all, folks. Frank and his mom get invited to a talk show, and he's in the spotlight. Sadly, his mom passes away 3 months later, and she leaves him her house and pet dog. Now here's where it gets interesting. Frank's buddy and fellow Vietnam vet, Klondike Washington, moves in with him and hands over a USB flash drive. This flash drive is for Frank's late mom's safe deposit box, but Frank doesn't have a clue what's on it, so he sticks it in the safe for safekeeping. So, one night, Klondike heads out to grab some cigarettes, but he runs into these 2 troublemakers, Terrence and Sebastian. They're after the flash drive Klondike had given to Frank, but Klondike, he tells them a fib, saying he doesn't have it with him. Well, that doesn't sit right with those 2 thugs, and they get into a big argument. Sadly, things take a dark turn, and they end up killing Klondike. Those guys make a quick getaway too. When Frank hears the news about his best friend's death, he rushes over to the morgue to see Klondike's body. He's pretty shaken up and asks the police to dig deep into Klondike's murder and catch the guys who did it. Now here's where it gets tricky. One night, Frank's pal Officer Malark, who's a cop, swings by his place. Officer Malark tries to reassure Frank that the police department is really trying hard to find Klondike's killer. But later, Frank watches the news and sees that the cops have solved other crimes way faster. That doesn't sit right with him, especially when he catches them goofing off at the police station, not doing much about his best friend's murder. So Frank decides he's got to take matters into his own hands and figure out this mystery himself. He's had enough of the police dragging their feet. Frank's on the case now. He starts by checking out the alley where Klondike got shot. After poking around a bit, he finds some empty bullet casings and a locket with a lady's picture inside. Frank thinks, this could be a clue. He takes the bullets and the locket to a pawn shop, and the guy working there tells him that the locket belongs to a fella named Terrence. Inside the locket, there's a photo of Terrence's wife. Now Frank's got an address for this Terrence guy, so he hurries over there. But Terrence ain't home, and according to his wife, he hasn't been home for a whole week. Frank hands the locket back to Terrence's wife and asks her where he might be. Terrence's wife spills the beans and says he used to play basketball with some buddies at a park. So Frank's off to that park in a hurry. When he gets there, he finds a bunch of guys playing hoops and goes up to them to ask about Terrence. Frank goes up to those young fellas at the park, thinking they might know where Terrence is, but instead of being helpful, those guys start making fun of Frank. Well, that really ticks him off, and he ends up giving them a good thrashing. Turns out, those guys were actually Terrence's pals. After Frank gets them to quit fooling around, They spill the beans and say they don't really know where Terrence is, but they mention a guy named Ronaldo who might have the scoop because Terrence and Ronaldo were tight buddies. So, Frank makes his way over to Ronaldo's place and meets Ronaldo's roommate. This roommate tells Frank that Ronaldo's hanging out at a bar across town. Frank heads there but runs into some folks at the bar who don't want him there. He's not having any of that, so he has to put a couple of them in their place. Finally, Frank tracks down Ronaldo and gives him a little scare, saying he'll spill the beans about where Terrence is. In the end, Frank gets the lowdown that Terrence is seeing a gal named Tanya. Now we switch over to this big shot gangster boss named Panther. He's actually the guy who's the boss of Terrence and Sebastian, those two troublemakers. Panther's having a real serious chat with Major Williams, who's the crooked mayor in town. The mayor's putting pressure on Panther to find that flash drive Klondike swiped real quick. Turns out that flash drive has some proof of the mayor's dirty deeds and corruption during his time in office. Turns out Klondike used to work for Panther, but he decided to quit and did something sneaky. He grabbed Major Williams' super important flash drive and ran off with it, betraying Panther in the process. So, Frank's on a mission, and he gets some help from his neighbor, a kid named Martin. They want to figure out what's on that flash drive. One evening, Frank pays a visit to Tanya, who works at a massage place. He asks her about Terrence, but she's not too helpful. So Frank decides to tail her quietly when she's heading home from work. After sneaking into Tanya's place, Frank finally tracks down Terrence. He gets kinda rough with him to squeeze out info about who ordered the hit on Klondike. Terrence, being a bit tight-lipped, wasn't spilling the beans, so Frank decided to take matters into his own hands. He kind of forced Terrence's hand onto the kitchen trash can, hurting him a bit. Well, that did the trick, and Terrence finally spills the beans. Turns out Klondike got himself into some serious trouble. He got on the wrong side of a drug big shot named Panther. See, Klondike swiped that flash drive we've been talking about, and it had some secret info about digging an oil well in the neighborhood for Major Williams. Terrence even tells Frank where he can find this Panther guy. But before Frank heads out to face Panther, he goes home to get ready. But he hears a ruckus at Martin's place. Amber, Martin's mom, is having a real bad time with her abusive husband. Frank steps in and saves her from the mess. Because Frank's the hero, Amber invites him over for lunch. Frank doesn't waste the chance, so he puts on his fancy clothes, cleans up nice, and smells great. During lunch, things get pretty cozy, and they're about to share a kiss when Martin Jr. walks in on them. Frank insists that Amber and Martin stay at his place until he fixes her front door. The next day, Frank hands over the flash drive to Officer Malark and then tracks down Panther to his hideout. Panther got wind of Frank coming for him and told his crew to ambush Frank if he didn't bring that precious flash drive. So Frank ends up in a real tough spot. Panther's gang overpowers him and he passes out. They capture him and start doing some terrible things to get him to spill the beans about where the flash drive is hidden. They even hook him up to an electric shock gadget, trying to make him talk. But you know what? Frank's one stubborn guy. He doesn't give in, even when he's getting hurt real bad. Panther gets pretty frustrated with Frank's silence. So he snatches Frank's wallet and finds out where he lives, thinking maybe the flash drive's stashed there with his loved ones. Panther's got his men torturing Frank while he rushes over to Frank's house, thinking he's gonna find that flash drive. But Frank manages to wriggle out of his bindings. He had a little match he got from Amber. Frank lights that match and throws it at some oil drums lying around, setting the whole place on fire, causing a big explosion. Panther makes a run for it, but Frank's not letting him get away that easy. They both swipe buses and start this wild chase, causing a whole bunch of damage to other vehicles along the way. Eventually, they wreck both buses. Now Frank's not giving up. He keeps chasing Panther on foot. Along the way, he bumps into those two troublemakers from the bus earlier. These guys, thinking they can redeem themselves, try to record a video of them beating up Frank on their cell phone. But Frank shows them who's boss once again and keeps after Panther. Panther finally gets to Frank's house and finds Amber there. He threatens to harm her if Frank doesn't cough up the flash drive. But just in the nick of time, Frank shows up to rescue Amber. These two start fighting, and it spills all the way out to the front yard. Just when Panther's about to pounce on Frank again, Amber jumps onto Panther's back, trying to slow him down. This gives Frank the opening he needs to take down Panther for good. The cops finally catch Panther, and things get even juicier when they arrest Major Williams too. See, the media spilled the beans on their shady business. As for Frank, Amber, and Martin, they all live happily ever after. The end. So the moral of the story is sometimes all it takes to uncover corruption and defeat bad guys is a hero in a hot dog suit and a little help from your neighbors.